Welcome to Listen MKE Live. My name is Raquel Rutledge. I'm an investigative reporter with the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel, and I will be your host tonight. Thank you so much for joining us. Tonight we're talking about an issue with electrical fires and the way that they impact residents of Milwaukee, specifically renters and low-income African-American renters. The Milwaukee Journal Sentinel has spent several months investigating this issue, and we have come up with some concerning and surprising findings. Tonight we have a panel of experts with us. We have landlords, we have policymakers, we have a victim who survived an electrical fire, and others joining us. So we're looking forward to our discussion. Listen MKE Live is a collaboration of the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel, WUWM, which is Milwaukee's public radio, public NPR station, also the Milwaukee Public Library and Milwaukee PBS. To bring you guys up to speed on the findings from our investigation for the last several months, we have just a short video. Let's take a look.
There's a fire on the second floor. I think it was probably electrical.
Electrical? Okay.
Yeah. I'm not 100% sure, but that's what it looks like.
Some of the pictures you saw in that video are from the home of Leilani Zollicoffer. Leilani was able to survive an electrical fire this past April. She could not be with us tonight, but we talked to her on Friday. Take a listen to what she said.
My name is Leilani, and I want to talk about the electrical issues that I had at my home. I was staying with my kids and my boyfriend at the moment when lights and things started going off in my house. The lights were starting to flicker, and half of the room lights wasn't working. Like one half of the house was electricity worked, and then one half of the house the electricity didn't work. The fire started around, I want to say about 1 o'clock at night. I was sleeping in the bed, and my daughter, my 2-year-old was woke, and my 5-year-old was sleeping in her room. My boyfriend was up, and he ended up waking me up in a frantic because it was smoke coming from the ground. I wouldn't never knew it was anything going on because it wasn't a actual fire with flames. It was more a fire with smoke. So I wouldn't knew nothing if it wasn't for him, honestly. When we had called the fire department, they came out, and the fire had to be put out by 2 different hoses due to them not finding the fire, and it was ended up being in the wall. That's how we knew it was electrical fire, because it started from the wall and it spread very fast. I knew it was issues going on in the house, but I didn't think that it was going to be a fire. So when it happened, I was very disappointed, upset, confused, hurt. And since then, it's been a struggle finding a house, finding somewhere to go, because that was somewhere that I was looking forward to staying to for a while until I was able to move somewhere else.
2 residents of the city of Milwaukee who were not as fortunate as Leilani Zollicoffer were Clarence Morrell and Patricia Colston. They both perished in a suspected electrical fire in October of 2019. Joining us now is Justin Padway. He is a Milwaukee attorney who is representing the family of Clarence Morrell. Thank you for joining us, Justin.
Thank you for having me, Raquel. I appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. Can you tell us a little bit about that case? Tell us, what happened with Clarence Morrell and Patricia Colston, and what is the basis for your lawsuit against the landlord in that case?
Absolutely. This really is a case about justice and accountability in a tragic and really preventable setting. Your team has done an excellent job in terms of doing investigative research as to the extent of this problem. And a lot of times these fires have and can often have deadly consequences. And in this situation, I represent the family of Clarence Morrell and the estate of Mr. Morrell. And Ms. Colston rented a home located at 3936, 3938 North 14th Street from a landlord named Will Sherrard and/or Morocco Investments, LLC. And exactly the problems that you have uncovered happened at that residence. It was an electrical fire. It was highly preventable. And these types of situations really can be prevented by the landlord. So this is, in essence, a wrongful death claim, a survivorship claim, and it's based in negligence. It's based in a landlord's duty to really ensure that these electrical issues and that these homes are up to a code that we all deserve.
Yeah. And so was there reason to believe in that particular home? I mean, I think our initial investigation found there had been some code violations, previous electrical code violations. In a wrongful death suit like this, is it necessary to prove that this landlord had, the department had warned the landlord? Or is it, that maybe even just if residents had complained to the landlord, is that enough? Or what sort of prior knowledge is necessary in a case like that?
I believe both are not necessary. Obviously, if you have a tenant continually flagging an electrical issue and you have a landlord that's not responsive to that issue and is not doing their due diligence and their follow-up, that would be grounds for the negligence claim. In this situation, we have it even a step further. We have the Department of Neighborhood Services who is documenting the electrical wiring issues, requiring a permit to fix those issues, and we have no fixing of those issues. So in this type of situation, it's a willful disregard, even in a step beyond negligence.
Got it. And is it ever in the, what about Department of Neighborhood Services, their responsibility? By the way, we did invite the city, representative city officials to join us. They declined. But what is their obligation on this front?
Well, I think the Department of Neighborhood Services obviously had a much bigger role in protecting protecting tenants from these types of situations prior to the law change under Governor Walker. I do believe that there should be 1,000% follow-up when you have these types of issues to make sure that a permit was actually drawn. If you are flagging these issues, I believe it takes everyone really to kind of come together and make sure that this doesn't continually happen. So the DNS is there for a reason. It's there to protect tenants, people in the city. And in this situation, I believe we had a situation that could have been highly preventable.
Yeah, tell us, how did you find this case? I mean, obviously we've been investigating this and looking at the numbers and finding that, one of our initial findings was that, these suspected electrical fires do impact renters in Milwaukee, especially in this particular zip code where Patricia Colston and Clarence Morrell lived at, or he was visiting, but in 53206 at 5 times the rate of the rest of the city. But I wondered how, we don't hear often of cases like this. And so I wondered where you found this. How did it come to your attention?
So we're a family law firm. We've been around for 70 years. We have consistently helped people that walk through our doors. Our goal is to obviously find justice for people that have been wronged. In this type of situation, just like anything else, we became aware of the situation through the client. We looked at the situation. We saw the injustice that was done. And the client demanded accountability. The Morrell family wanted accountability. They deserved accountability. And when we look at a situation like this and we see that we can make an impact, we can make a difference, not only in Mr. Morrell's memory and his family, but also in this greater problem, we find this is why we do what we do. We want to help. We want to make the difference. And we're grateful to be able to do that.
Yeah, tell us a little bit about Clarence Morrell. We interviewed family of Patricia Colston extensively, but we weren't able to find Clarence Morrell's family readily. So tell us a little bit about him.
Yeah, he was a wonderful man. I mean, really, when it comes down to it, he was a young man, and he had a really excellent relationship with his daughter Angel. He had an excellent relationship with his grandson. He was somebody that was incredibly musical, incredibly kind, and just really always had that joyful smile and that way of life about him. In this situation particularly, he was there at that residence because he was helping Patricia Colston move in. I mean, that's the kind of person that he really was. He lent his hand to anybody. And I guess to just sum it up, he was a family man, just like the rest of us. And this is really hard for the family.
And what we know about that fire, again, that one started early in the morning, 6 a.m., a 911 call from the downstairs neighbors. From what we can tell, I mean, is there anything else you learned in your discovery that you could share with us about the way that fire unfolded? From what we know, the call came in, firefighters got there within 6 or 7 minutes. Yeah, is there any other details that you could tell from,
Sure.
again, that you found?
With what I can disclose is I believe that this was, again, highly preventable on two different reasons. For the first reason, obviously, there was forewarnings of this wiring issues. There was the need for the permit, and it wasn't obtained, and the issues were not corrected. On a second level, a lot of these fires are incredibly dangerous because they don't present themselves in a typical form. They start inside of the walls, so they do not allow for a lot of oxygen, which creates a lot of smoke. Smoke inhalation is the most dangerous thing of a fire. And in these residences, you didn't have smoke detectors. And that's an obligation for a landlord to put smoke detectors in. So not only was this really problematic from the perspective of a negligent upkeep of the house, but there was also statutory violations in not keeping the place up to code with respect to smoke detectors that really could save lives. I mean, they are there because they save lives. And you really have a double whammy in this situation, and you have tragic consequences as a result.
Tell us where you are in the lawsuit. What comes next?
We are currently in discovery. So obviously lawsuits, there's a long road ahead, and we are in the process of discovery, in the process of depositions. We do not have a trial date yet set. Discovery, for those that aren't aware, that's in essence the information gathering stage, the opportunity to do depositions on important individuals, such as fire detectives who determine the cause of the fire, such as Will Sherrard and such as his company.
Yeah, thank you. That is one of the findings of our investigation, was that we often suspect or imagine that when fire investigators come in to check out a fire, that they will nail down the cause of what actually started it. And we were surprised to find that 75% of these fires, fire investigators may suspect an electrical fire. They're very certain. They've ruled everything else out. They can see it behind the walls. But when it comes time to doing the paperwork, they will write it down as an undetermined because they don't have electrical engineers on staff, and they don't take it to that next level. And therefore, there is no accountability then for the landlord. And one of our other findings was about insurance, and that was this case in this case of Will Sherrard as well. We know that insurance companies will often investigate the fires because they have a vested interest. Well, we found that some landlords, not all, certainly not all, but some landlords don't have their properties insured. They've purchased them for $10,000, $12,000, and it's not insured. And so if the property is not insured, there isn't an insurance investigator. So these investigations stall out. So let's bring our other guests to the conversation. We have a landlord with us. We have Rosemary Oliveira. She owns 4 rental properties in the city of Milwaukee, in River West, in Harambe. And so Rosemary, welcome. We also have Mitch, the director of University of Wisconsin's Economic Justice Institute. He is a longtime provider of legal services to low-income families. Thank you for joining us, Mitch.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. And then we also have State Senator LaTanya Johnson. Thank you, Senator, for joining us. Senator Johnson is looking at different ways the state can be involved in helping rectify this situation. So, Senator, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Rosemary, I want to go to you first as a landlord. Talk to us about the responsibilities that landlords have. Like as an owner of properties, tell us how do you feel like what is your responsibility for keeping your residents safe?
I feel my responsibility is the ultimate responsibility to keep my tenants safe. And I just dismayed to hear this kind of thing where landlords simply broker their properties among these absentee landlords that are actually just investment companies. And I recently just purchased this property, actually closed on it today, And they assumed that I was an investment company. And they just sort of asked, do you know what you're doing? And I'm like, well, yeah, I'm actually buying a building. And the more I learned about these guys, especially the condition of this building, the angrier I got and the more disgusted I became with them. I had the first inspection and went down with a regular home inspector, and I'm looking at leaking pipes, leaking onto exposed wires in the basement. And I'm standing there also with the company that's supposedly doing their their property management here in Wisconsin and in Milwaukee. And I believe these people are also culpable in this. He goes, yeah, that's on our list. I'm like, wouldn't you kind of fix that right away? And he goes, yeah, well, we'll get to it. And I'm like, okay. And so I called in this, I got a city inspector. It's the city allows you to pay to have an inspector come in, and it's not, they don't charge the violations to, if they find anything, to the owner, the current owner. So my agent said, we're coming in and we're bringing in a city inspector. And the owner said, no, you're not. We're not letting you in this building again. So it was within our inspection period. So being from River West, we went in with the city inspector. We didn't tell him we were trespassing, but I really wanted to buy the building. And I have 2 pages of, violations that they were given to me. And basically the owner is, well, if they find any violations, we'll have to claim that. If you pull out of this deal, then we'll have to tell the next buyer that there are all these violations, so you can't go in there. And I'm like, well, okay, thanks.
Let me stop you for a quick second, Rosemary. People are living in this building at this time, correct?
Yes.
So there are tenants in there that are
There are
not
current
aware.
tenants. Yes.
And you told me that the inspector said something. Tell me what he said, something very shocking to you about the condition of the electrical system in there. Did he not?
Well, he said he'd never seen anything so bad. And he was shocked at what he saw. So I agreed with him. I'm not sure if there's something else you were looking for me to say, but he, there's so many things wrong down in the basement. It's sort of terrifying to think of. I'm having them all fixed. I've got a very large bill.
Yeah, well, and tell us. I mean, that's one of the arguments, from landlord associations is that it would be unrealistic to ask people to bring their properties up to code. Give us a ballpark on what you might.
I don't think it's unrealistic. I think it's about $22,000. That's for openers. I still have plumbing to do too, but to upgrade the system so that we live in a modern world here. We have a million things in our kitchen that we plug in, and when you plug those things in, it's going to overload the wires. So we're upgrading everything in the basement, including the drop from the pole.
Yes. Okay.
Splitting out all of the boxes. And it's like,
Mitch, I saw you shaking your head a little bit. Is this something you hear from clients regularly? I mean, you're hearing tenants that live in these conditions. What do you see?
Yeah. I was reacting to the comment that, it's unrealistic and expensive to bring buildings up to code, rental housing up to code. It's the same refrain that actually, we've heard historically when things like seatbelts were proposed, airbags were proposed, anti-lock brakes were proposed, that it would destroy the automotive industry and no one would ever be able to afford a car again. And clearly that has happened, and that's why we all walk and bike everywhere. It's just not the case, right? These things are necessary safety precautions. They're a change. They're hard to make changes. They're expensive, but they save lives, and that's what matters.
Not only that, they pay off. And, it's like, I don't know if they're just lazy or what, but these kind of investments have always paid off for me when I've improved a house. And I know this one will pay off.
And so what, Senator Johnson, I know we've talked in the past there, you were looking into some things that the state could do perhaps administratively, and you're researching the idea about mandatory insurance, which would at least help with the investigative side of fires at some point. Tell us what you're looking at.
Well, basically, we had a conversation with the Legislative Council, and we were told by the Legislative Council for the state that they believe that the city has the ability to issue ordinances that would require landlords to have liability insurance, but also allow the city to reinstate their rental inspection program through neighborhood housing. Um, Basically, the statutes state that if there is a situation, let me see if I can get the exact wording um, to read to you. So, the statute states that a local government may establish an inspection program if there is evidence of high rates of building code complaints or violations within a rental district. And based on that, um, an inspection program looking for violations, which would include the electrical system, is believed to be something that the city can do through its local ordinance. And I know that the city of Milwaukee has had a hearing. I believe it was on Tuesday um, to consider basically this exact thing, which is to require landlords to have insurance and to reinstate the rental inspection program, especially in those areas where they've seen a high number of electrical fires and violations.
Yeah, one of the obstacles that the council talked about was just that the state legislation capped the fees that they could charge for having the inspections. So has there been a way, have you heard any changes around that front? If they can only charge $75 or $150 per inspection, their argument, the city's argument, is that it's cost prohibitive to do these proactive rental inspection programs. And by the way, our investigation did find that some of the biggest cities in the country do have proactive residential rental inspection programs. So other states are doing it. What would it take for Wisconsin to bring that back? I know you're saying it's allowed under the state, but again, with the cap on the fees, they're arguing that it's that it's cost prohibitive.
Unfortunately, I would love to sit here and say that I think that that's something that we would be able to change. But unfortunately, the people who are in power were the ones who enacted the caps. And those individuals are landlords. A lot of your elected officials are landlords. And especially on the Republican side, some of the biggest landlords are also in leadership. And we've seen, session after session, um, a lot of the regulations that those in control have placed um, on the legislature in terms of their ability and the city's ability to regulate these predatory landlords. And unfortunately, I wish I could say that those capped fees were going to change, but I can't see it changing, not in the atmosphere that we have right now at the Capitol.
Thank you. We're listening. You're watching and listening to Listen MKE Live. Listen MKE Live is a collaboration between the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel, WUWM, which is Milwaukee's NPR station, which is 89.7. It's a collaboration also with the Milwaukee Public Library and Milwaukee PBS. We're going to continue our discussion. We're also taking questions on Facebook. If anybody out there, if you want to join in with your questions, comments, we're happy to take those as well. Going back to Mitch for a minute, Mitch, I do want to hear about more, because I feel like you have lots of contact with the residents that are in dire situations often, and I just want to know, like, what you hear from them. What are they describing to you? We got out a little bit, and we found what we found, but I feel like you have another perspective as well. Tell us.
Yeah, renters who are living in apartments with any type of habitability concern, whether it's an electrical issue, a mold issue, leaky pipes, broken windows, any type of issue, are actually generally scared to report those issues, right? They're scared because there is, as the Supreme Court in Wisconsin has recognized, an inherent unequal bargaining power or positioning between property owners and renters. Property owners have the ability to retaliate. There is a defense against retaliation. However, asserting that defense is very difficult to do. So occasionally we will hear from renters. It's actually a good chunk of the work that we do, but the times that we hear are truly tragic times. Like Attorney Justin Padaway said, like people come after tragic events have happened, whether, hopefully it isn't a fire that's led to someone's death, but after they've been displaced from their home, their kids are sick, they've been going to the doctor multiple times because of some type of mold or some other type of issue with lack of sanitation, sewage backups, all of these types of things. They actually have to get to the point where it gets really expensive for a property owner to make those repairs. And that's what I love hearing from the property owner here on this panel, that you make an investment. In fact, when you make it early and the cost is low, you'll get a good return on that. When you make it only after it's ballooned into a massive problem that's actually impacting people's health, not only is it already too late, but it is also much more expensive.
Well, and you bring up a number of really good points. How can you convey, when you say they're scared to speak up and complain, how realistic is the threat of eviction, the trauma that goes with housing insecurity? I think people hear that, and is that a legitimate concern? Are you seeing people being retaliated against when they do complain? Absolutely.
You see that people are retaliated against, and it's been well documented by Matthew Desmond in his book. If people complain, first off, renters don't have training on how to rent, so they might not know about neighborhood services. And if they've grown up in Milwaukee and they move just outside, there is no neighborhood services. Who do they call? Like, you don't know who to call. If you very well may live in an area where there is literally no one to call to come and inspect the property. So you reach out to the property owner, who sometimes could either retaliate or ask for inappropriate favors in exchange, or ask you to just deal with it or do an unsafe repair yourself. All types of situations like that I've actually seen, and other researchers have documented.
So what do you advise your clients then? What can they do? I mean, if you call the Department of Neighborhood Services, we've seen many cases where the inspector comes out, documents the violation, documents it to the point where the homeowner, the actual landlord, is wanted for arrest because they ignore. And so that's if you go that route. So if you complain that route, or if you complain to your landlord. So what do you advise your clients to do?
Yeah, you have to document those conversations. So it's very normal in ordinary sort of human behavior for an individual to reach out to the person directly involved. So those that don't feel threatened might call the property owner. And if you do that, I would not call them. I would send them an email. I would send them a text message. That way that you have a record of that. I would be I very much advise folks keep records of communication. So you have a record of, when did this problem start? When did you make a request for it to be repaired? And then record, was there any response? And again, email is great because you have a chain of communication there to document those types of repair and maintenance requests. If you're lucky enough to live in Milwaukee, or only a few other cities in the state of Wisconsin have similar organizations, city-based organizations that actually inspect rental property. Most of them don't. It's great to get the inspectors at those few cities that do a rental inspections that come out and do a rental inspection. And then call your legislator. As Senator Johnson mentioned, there's a lot of folks in power who enacted a law that made it impossible for most cities to do programmatic regular inspections. The problem isn't how do we fix that? It's a problem that was literally created when we took that away and we deregulated the ability to have those programmatic inspections, and we capped the fee that folks could get. So it's very, very difficult to do an inspection unless there's a series of complaints. And again, complaints are hard to make and hard to document.
So Justin, I want to come to you with another question on the courts in just 1 second, but Senator, just to that point, is there anything else that you advise people to do? I mean, is there action that they can take?
Honestly, vote for other people to be elected into office. That would help me greatly. I represent parts of 53206. The median resale value of a home in that area is $4,300, but yet people are paying rents upwards of $800 or more. And I mean, do the math. It's extremely profitable for those landlords from the get go. And then to not have to do anything to make those dwellings livable and for our children to be kept safe. It's unconscionable. And there are some good landlords out there. There are. But unfortunately, the people that are in power in the state legislature, who are landlords, created legislation that was friendly toward them. And they had very little concern, if any, for anyone else. And unfortunately, we're seeing the repercussions of that. We're seeing people lose their lives. We're seeing people lose their valuables. And these are individuals that are already vulnerable. So call your legislators, make sure that they hear you. We have a system in the Capitol Call Forward. And as far as my office goes, if anyone reaches out to my office, whether that be phone call, email, or walk ins, we document that information. So we can literally pull up information that will tell us how many people who have contacted our office regarding this issue. If people make this a big enough issue, then and maybe then we would be able to have those in power do something to try and address this
Thank you. Yep.
issue.
You're,
But
you're
until then,
Thank you so much. Yeah, you're cutting out just at the end, but I caught you. Yes.
sorry.
Justin, talk to us about the role of the courts here. So you've got legal, personal lawsuits going on, and also what about at the municipal level in terms of enforcement with, again, when people have just thumbed their noses time and time again, and they're racking up hundreds of thousands of dollars in fines for not fixing their violations, and it gets taken to court, and where do those things end up? So talk to us about the court's role.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, there's not a massive enforcement mechanism. Obviously, we're all aware of certain landlords that have insane amount of judgments against them. And in essence, they're put on a payment plan for the most part. And I've seen payment plans that are $15 a month when you're owing $60,000, $150,000, et cetera. And by complying with those payment plans, you're complying in essence with the court order, even if you've been found in violation and are cited quite frequently in these types of situations. It really takes going to that next level in order to really hold landlords that are doing these types of things, that are taking advantage of really vulnerable populations, accountable. The court only has so much, in essence, enforcement mechanism in these types of situations. I personally would like to see more criminal liability for some of the more egregious cases.
Which we've seen in other states. I have seen for bigger properties. There's a case in Las Vegas where the owner of a motel that burned, it was a residential motel. It was a motel turned into residence for 15 or 18 units, and it killed a number of people, and they are definitely being held criminally. Well, they've been criminally charged in that case. Going back to Rosemary, I wanted to talk a little bit also about market forces. Are there things that could be done? I know one of the things that had been in place, at least for an exterior check, was like at the point of sale, the properties had to be brought up to code at the point of sale. That also changed in some prior legislation in previous years. Is there anything in the market, does it make sense to talk about that anymore? Bringing back, if the property is going to change hands, which would allow the people that have just ignored and racked up a ton of violations from selling it to somebody else, and then the process starts over, which we've seen that happen a lot. Is there anything you can imagine as somebody who does own a number of properties? Is that realistic? What else could be done market-wise?
Well, of course it's realistic. I think it's, in terms of the market, it seems like requiring insurance is a very reasonable requirement. requiring an inspection of some kind is also very reasonable, but would be very difficult, I think, for the city to accomplish with the number of people that they have working for them. And if they can't charge something for it that would be worthwhile, it would be very difficult for them to do that. Perhaps a home inspection, a required home inspection that the buyer or the seller pays for. That was the first inkling that there were some serious problems, though I also can recognize them myself, being a landlord. If I look at something, I'm pretty sure I know what I'm looking at. In terms of market forces, the market right now with these landlords that are investor groups and their property management companies that don't fix anything is that they're just harvesting rents. Like the senator said, you can still make money without making ridiculous amounts of money.
Mm-hmm. And what about licensing rental properties? Is licensing landlords to...
Licensing landlords is a great idea. I think that's very smart. And I know that we have a landlord training program that probably everybody ought to go through, but they don't. But I don't know if that requirement is something that, I think it's a great idea, but then I'm that kind of a person. These people aren't those kinds of people. They're not invested in our community. They don't even care about us. They don't care about our people. They don't care about us. They don't care about our city. They don't care what happens to our housing stock.
So going back to what Justin mentioned, Mitch, what about the criminal liability? Tell us, how hard is it to prove criminal liability in some of these cases?
Right, criminal liability is a tough standard, right? Proof beyond a reasonable doubt. The reporting that was done on the Fires and Wires story, in particular, highlights a lot of difficulties about figuring out, what the cause of, for instance, an electrical issue behind a wall is, right? The video that we watched at the top here, noted that things are sometimes hidden. So it's very hard to assess beyond a reasonable doubt that someone is criminally liable. That's why I'm a fan. Not only that, but sort of decarceration is a movement that would, in general, cost less for cities and counties and states. But also, I think, have a quicker impact to go at a civil standard. And that's why I'm more of a fan of licensing and other training requirements. Again, we require licenses for real estate brokers and real estate agents. So we protect the people with enough money to buy a home because they can only buy it from a real estate agent or a broker typically who has a license. But if you want to rent property, you don't need a license. You want to cut hair, teach kids, you need a license. But if you want to rent to kids and their families, you don't need a license. You don't need any training whatsoever. And that's incredible. People that I talk to are shocked that we don't require licenses for real estate rentals.
Mm-hmm. How important is it on the front end when it comes to that nailing down that actual cause of the fire? That's one of the areas, the fire department says, well, we don't have electrical, engineers. The police department says we don't have electrical engineers. The state fire marshals, they do investigate when it's a homicide or an arson. They suspect criminal activity. They will get to the bottom of that, or at least try. But when they suspect it's electrical, they also kind of throw their hands up. Admittedly, that's what they say. We just don't. So is there anything else, and obviously we talked about the insurance. If we had insurance mandates, then you'd have insurance companies doing it. But outside of that, is there any reason to spend energy and time on that avenue of trying to get those folks to actually really solidify a cause and say, indeed, in fact, it was electrical? Is that not? Anybody want to weigh in on that one? Who do you?
I would say it's a really difficult proposition to again pay the experts to do it, and then often you will have in the legal field, we often end up with competing experts. So you get a battle of experts where one expert says it was one cause and another says it's the other cause. When it's after a fire or a tragedy, it's too late. It is by definition after the tragedy, it's too late. It might help then force more positive change, but we shouldn't have to watch more tragedies like you've uncovered with the 8 different deaths That's too many already.
Yes, well, thank you. We are taking questions from Facebook. If anybody wants to ask our panel here or weigh in on the discussion, you are watching Listen MKE Live. Is a collaboration between the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel, WUWM, which is 89.7, our local NPR station, the Milwaukee Public Library, and also Milwaukee PBS. Thank you for tuning in. So the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel is continuing this investigation. As you guys probably know, we've been out, we've inspected, we've hired an electrician to check out some of these properties, and we're just finalizing our data and working on that next story. So there is more to come in this series. Back to the panelists, is there anything else that you think we need to be investigating on this issue? Is there anything that we're missing that you feel like, that's very, pertinent to this, to the vulnerability of these residents that are, as we said, 53206 is the epicenter, but this issue spreads out across the city. It is definitely, and it's not, the other thing I thought was really interesting too, is a lot of landlords sometimes will say, well, it's just old housing stock. And what we have found is that there's plenty of old housing stock in other parts of the city, Shorewood, east side of Milwaukee, old housing stock, more affluent areas where the electrical systems have been maintained. And so you're not seeing the rates of suspected electrical fires in those areas. But what else? Anybody else? Is there anything else out there that we're missing? Yes, Mitch.
So one thing, again, looking at what we do if you want to buy a home, we require a real estate condition report. It's a 6-page mandatory form for anyone who's bought a home in Wisconsin. And if you're selling a home, you have to fill it out, and there are 50 questions, and you have to disclose known defects under these 50 very specific questions. We could require something like that if you're going to rent a home. Again, we protect buyers of homes much more than we protect renters of homes. And the checklist format would help, again, an untrained, unlicensed real estate or rental property owner would help them go through this and say, okay, you know what, I haven't actually ever checked this. I don't know any, like they could go through and they could say, oh, you know what, actually, maybe I should have these things inspected every now and again. Because right now, the state law for rental properties owners is very, very limited. There's almost nothing that has to be disclosed. There's nothing that has to be disclosed on any type of written form for a rental property. You only have to disclose if you knew of a particular violation or upon a reasonable investigation could have known, but you don't have to fill out a form, and you don't have to do that in that level of detail that you do for home ownership.
And is that something that could be done even at the local level? That could be an ordinance versus a state, because as the senator said, getting something statewide is likely going to be
No, you can't do it because the state legislature preempted local ordinances regulating most rental property regulations. They took away the ability of any city or county or municipality to require a property owner to tell their renters anything that isn't already required. So I suppose you could go to the Department of Ag, Trade, and Consumer Protection and tell them to beef up the formatting requirement that is in existing state law. That might be a little bit of wiggle room, but it isn't easy because of the preemption that was passed in 2015.
Okay. Yeah. And Rosemary, I'll get to you in just one second. We do have a comment from a viewer who said that oftentimes the property is in such disrepair or has outstanding code violations that the owners aren't able to get property insurance. And he said that the value of the property is so low and has no mortgage that he said we'd be surprised at the number of owners who rent out these homes without having insurance. Yeah, it's hard to know because there is no insurance information is not public information. One of the things we did at the Journal Sentinel to get an idea perhaps of how many people may or may not have insurance on their rental properties is we did a random sample of 25 properties in 53206 just to see if they had mortgages on them. And we found that 75% did not have any mortgage registered with the Register of Deeds office. Doesn't mean they don't have a mortgage, but it does mean they likely don't have a mortgage and they're likely not required to have insurance. Again, doesn't mean they don't have insurance, but they're not required to have insurance. And that was 75% of our limited sample, but it was a random sample, gives us an idea. And so our viewer is finding that that's true anecdotally in his from his experience. Yes, Rosemary.
I just want to say that these investment companies are busy not wanting to know what the problems are in their buildings. So I don't want to know. So they're not going to, they told me nothing was wrong with this building. Absolutely nothing, when it truly was. And property management companies are part of this thing. So we need to think about them as well. Have you noticed the explosion of property management companies in Milwaukee? Some of them are very good. Some of them are like the one that I ran into on this building. So I'm not sure whether something could be done with them as well. I don't know if they require licenses for management companies for rental properties, but I mean, he's standing there looking at this dripping pipe on top of exposed wires, and nothing has been done there.
Yeah, that is definitely an interesting point. Has anybody had an experience with the property management companies and their liability and their role in this? Do they show up what you guys, Justin or Mitch, and what you guys are seeing?
I haven't seen that. No.
Okay.
They're the ones who are responsible. And when I hear also from my neighbors who are renting properties, they call the management company, nothing gets done. And they are the buffer between the absentee investor and the tenant.
One thing I find so problematic is I don't think a lot of these renters have any idea the amount of violations of the entity or the landlord or the company that they're renting from. And it is difficult to track down. Obviously, all the information with respect to violations is on the Department of Neighborhood Services. You can find it, but it would be really helpful to kind of have an aggregate set of a property owner and what violations they have across the board, so that so that tenants really have an idea of who they're renting from.
Yes, that is a good point. And Senator, let me ask you this. I mean, why is this happening in our African-American neighborhoods in Milwaukee? How has it come to this?
When we were arguing about this legislation on the floor, we said that this was going to happen because of the predatory landlord situation in Milwaukee. And as you can see, it's manifested. And I think that why it's been allowed to happen in Milwaukee is because of those individuals who are in control, their view of Milwaukee, as well as Milwaukee residents, and the fact that it's happening in predominantly Black neighborhoods. We can see from our racial disparities, with Wisconsin being pretty dead last in pretty much everything, including the worst place to raise an African American child, the worst place for African Americans in the nation, that there isn't a lot of thought or a lot of good intentions when it comes to legislation and how that may adversely affect certain communities, especially those communities of color. And unfortunately, it manifests itself in the dwellings that people of color rent. I mean, and we know this. We see this at the state level, whether it's the electrical wiring issue, lead paint, or lead pipes in the home. We know that these are issues, and they're affecting our communities of color, and in particularly our kids.
Yes. Yeah. And we have heard from tenants who tell us that they've lived through electrical fires in the past, that it isn't the first one for them. We have some residents telling us that they actually, before they leave their house, that they unplug all of their electronics. Like they know just they're leaving, unplug it. So that's the kind of conditions that we've, that we're hearing about, and where there just are not enough outlets. And so people are running the wires in every different direction. And a lot of times, again, tenants will get blamed for using extension cords, because extension cords are known to be definitely fire hazards, especially when people are plugging in things like air conditionings or microwaves or things of that nature that draw a lot of power. So they get blamed a lot of times for that. But what happens is there may be one outlet that works in the room, and you're trying to plug in all these things. So we're hearing a lot of different things. We are going to keep investigating this. Like I said, we have another story coming soon. And so we're not, there's more work obviously to be done. So I thank you guys so much for taking your time. It's been really insightful, and thanks for all those watching. And it's just stay tuned to JS Online. We will also just, I guess I really quick will mention, there are some things that just some quick warning signs for electrical fires for anybody who is watching. I was talking to a journalism class the other day about this story, and I was telling them some of the warning signs, and some of the students were like, oh my gosh, I live in houses where the lights flicker, or where the switch sparks, or where the outlets get warm, or where your plugs don't fit in snugly. If they fall out, if you plug something in, it falls out, that causes electricity to arc and spark. That can cause a fire. These are all warning signs that you should contact an electrician, contact your landlord, and have them contact an electrician. We will also at JS Online, we have other information about this whole series, our findings, etc. So please tune in, and there's more to come on this. Thank you so much for tuning in to Listen MKE Live. Have a good night, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.